Julian Volkov sat in the corner booth. His booth. At La Fiamma, it was always his booth. The red leather was worn smooth by the weight of his presence over years of quiet dinners and silent, lethal agreements. He was a man carved from shadow and stillness, his tailored suit a dark contrast to the warm, amber light of the restaurant. His hair was silver at the temples, a distinguished frost on a mountain peak. His eyes, however, were chips of ice, missing nothing. They called him the ghost on the street because his problems, and the people who caused them, simply vanished. Across from him sat Marco, his lieutenant. Loyal. Unquestioning. Marco was younger, his face still holding a hint of the street brawler he once was, but his eyes were old with the things he had seen at Julian's side. Two other men, large and silent as statues, stood near the entrance to their private alcove. They were part of the scenery, their presence a low hum of violence beneath the clinking of silverware and polite conversation that filled the rest of the dining room. The meeting had been brief. A territory dispute settled with a nod. A matter of disrespect resolved with a quiet word. Julian's world was one of order. His order. He ran his city with the precision of a watchmaker, every piece in its place, every gear turning as he decreed. Chaos was a disease he did not tolerate. He lifted a glass of water to his lips. The liquid was clear, simple. He preferred it to the expensive wine the owner always offered. It kept the mind sharp. Then the order broke. It started with a commotion at the front door. A raised voice. A frantic plea. The maître d', a man who prided himself on unflappable composure, sounded agitated. Julian did not turn his head. He did not need to. He felt the ripple in the room, the sudden tension that silenced forks against plates. A woman. She burst past the maître d's restraining arm. She was young, maybe early 20s. Her hair was a wild tangle, escaping a hastily made knot. Her coat was plain, her shoes worn. She was a sparrow in a cage of peacocks, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. They scanned the room, desperate, searching. Marco began to rise. Boss? Julian made no move. He watched her. Her gaze swept past the tables of wealthy patrons, past the couples on dates, and then it locked onto his booth. It was as if a compass needle had found its true north. A terrible, inevitable north. She started walking toward them. Her steps were not hesitant. They were fueled by a final, desperate burst of energy. The air grew thick. The two guards by the alcove tensed, their hands shifting inside their jackets. Marco was a coiled spring ready to launch himself between her and his boss. The woman did not slow. She reached the table, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, but her eyes burned with a fire that seemed to consume all the air around her. She looked directly at Julian. Not at his men. At him. And then she did the unthinkable. She raised her hand. The movement was a blur of righteous fury. The sound was a gunshot in the silent room. A sharp, stinging crack that echoed off the damask-covered walls. Her palm connected with Julian Volkov's cheek. The world stopped. Marco's chair scraped back as he lunged forward. The guards moved in unison, weapons appearing as if by magic. The entire restaurant held its breath, a collective gasp frozen in 100 throats. To strike Julian Volkov was not an assault. It was a suicide. But Julian did not flinch. He did not even blink. He simply sat there, the red imprint of her hand blooming on his granite-like face. He raised a single, steady hand. Not a fist. An open palm. A silent command. Stop. Instantly, his men froze. Marco halted mid-stride, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. The guards lowered their weapons, though their bodies remained rigid with threat. The silence in the restaurant was absolute, a heavy blanket of fear and astonishment. Julian's gaze remained on the woman. She stood trembling, her hand still raised slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she had done. Her chest heaved. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He turned his head slightly, the movement slow, deliberate. His voice, when it came, was not a roar of anger. It was quiet. So quiet it was more terrifying than any shout. It cut through the silence, meant only for her, yet heard by everyone. Do it again. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is not what you think. It's a story about a slap that changed everything. If you're enjoying this, please like this video and hit that subscribe button. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's great to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. Julian Volkov was a man of immense, almost mythical, power. In the city's underworld, his name was spoken in hushed tones. He was not a thug or a gangster in the traditional sense. He was a strategist. A king on a brutal chessboard. His empire was built on logistics, information, and the unwavering enforcement of his own code. The code was simple. Rule 1: no civilians. The lives of ordinary people were to be untouched. Their businesses, their homes, their families, they were off limits. They were the landscape his world was built upon, and you did not poison the ground you stood on. Rule 2: respect is the only currency that matters. Money was a tool, but respect was the foundation. Disrespect was a debt that was always collected, swiftly and without appeal. Rule 3: your word is your bond. A promise made was a promise kept, whether it was to an ally or an enemy. In a world of lies, his word was iron. But Julian was not born into this life. He had clawed his way up from the gutter, from a past he kept locked away in the deepest vault of his memory. He had come to this country as a boy with nothing but a fierce will to survive. He remembered hunger. He remembered cold. He remembered the powerlessness of watching his mother work her fingers to the bone for scraps, only to be cheated and used by petty, cruel men. And he remembered Elena. Her name was a ghost on his lips, a memory he rarely allowed himself to touch. They had been young, full of impossible dreams in a world determined to crush them. Her spirit was as fiery as the woman's who now stood before him. Elena had believed in him. She had seen a good man beneath the hard shell he was already beginning to form. But his path had diverged from hers. To protect her, he had to leave her. He had chosen power over love, thinking it was the only way to keep the wolves at bay. He had become the wolf instead. In his wallet, behind a false partition, was a faded photograph. A young woman with laughing eyes and a defiant smile. Elena. He hadn't seen her in 25 years. He did not know if she was alive or dead, happy or sad. She was a ghost from a life he had sacrificed. The woman before him, trembling but unbroken, was a mirror. In her desperate, furious eyes, he saw Elena's fire. Her name, he would learn, was Anya. She did not slap him again. Her arm fell to her side, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a wave of crushing despair. Her shoulders slumped. She looked as if she was about to collapse. Julian's voice was soft. Sit. It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in a strange sort of gentleness. He gestured to the empty seat beside him. Anya stared at him, confused, her fear warring with a sliver of desperate hope. Why wasn't she being dragged out? Why wasn't she dead? Sit, he repeated. Marco, understanding the shift in his boss, pulled the chair out for her. She sank into it, her legs giving way. Julian looked at his men. Leave us. Marco hesitated. Boss, are you sure? Marco. You too. Wait for me in the car. The order was absolute. Marco nodded, his face a mask of professionalism that concealed his utter bewilderment. He and the other two men melted away, leaving the most feared man in the city alone with the young woman who had just assaulted him in public. The other patrons in the restaurant, sensing the private nature of the storm that had just passed, slowly returned to their meals, though their conversations were now hushed, their glances furtive. Julian waited for the alcove to feel private again. He flagged down a passing waiter. Bring her some tea. And some bread. The waiter, pale and nervous, scurried off. Julian turned his full attention to Anya. He said nothing. He simply watched her, his icy eyes patient. He was giving her space to find her voice. He knew terror. He knew desperation. He recognized the smell of it, the taste of it in the air. This was not the act of an enemy. This was the scream of a trapped animal. The tea arrived. Anya's hand shook so badly she could barely lift the cup. She wrapped her cold fingers around its warmth, as if it were a lifeline. "Why did you do that?" Julian asked finally. His voice was a low rumble. Anya swallowed hard. Her own voice was a hoarse whisper. I needed your attention." "You have it." The story tumbled out of her, a torrent of fear and grief. Her younger brother, Mikhail. Only 17. A good kid, but foolish. He fell in with the wrong crowd, started gambling online. Small bets at first, then bigger. He lost money he didn't have. He went to a loan shark. A name surfaced in her story. A name Julian knew. Dmitry Petrov. Julian's expression did not change, but a coldness settled deeper in his eyes. Petrov was a jackal. A bottom feeder who preyed on the weakest. He operated outside the established rules, a freelancer whose cruelty was his only real asset. Petrov had no honor. He was a cancer in the city, one Julian had been meaning to excise. Mikhail couldn't pay. The debt spiraled. Petrov's men had come to their small apartment, had terrified their mother. Yesterday, they had taken Mikhail. They had called Anya. They told her that her brother now worked for them. He was being used as a mule, moving illicit packages, his life held as collateral against the debt. If she went to the police, Mikhail would disappear forever. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I have no money. No one to turn to. I heard people talking on the street, they said you were the only one Petrov was afraid of. They said you were the king." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "So I found you. I didn't know how to ask. I thought if I did something that no one else would dare to do, you would have to see me." It was the most insane, desperate, and courageous plan Julian had ever heard. A slap as a plea for help. A declaration of powerlessness so profound it became an act of power. He studied her face, the defiant set of her jaw, the fire that had not been extinguished by her tears. It was so familiar. So painfully familiar. "What is your last name?" he asked, the question quiet. "Kovalenko," she said. It wasn't the name he expected. Not Elena's name. A flicker of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, pricked him. But the resemblance, it was more than just a passing similarity. It was in the way she held her head. The way her eyes flashed when she spoke of her brother. He had a choice to make. Julian sat in the silence, the weight of Anya's story settling in the space between them. He could feel the cold logic of his world pressing in. This was not his problem. Getting involved was a breach of his own protocol. It was messy. Emotional. It was a distraction from the cold calculus of power and control that had kept him alive and on top for decades. Helping her was a weakness. A sentimental indulgence. His men would see it. His rivals would hear of it. The ghost, moved by the tears of a girl. It would be a crack in the armor. And in his world, cracks were exploited until the whole structure shattered. He glanced down at the table. The polished surface of a silver spoon reflected a distorted image of his face. On his cheek, the faint red mark of her hand was still visible. A brand of her desperation. He looked at Anya. She was watching him, her breath held, her entire future hanging on his next word. And in that moment, he did not see a stranger. He saw a reflection of a promise he had made to himself a lifetime ago, in a different world, when he was just a boy watching his own mother suffer. He had sworn then that if he ever had power, he would use it to shield the helpless, to punish the bullies. And he saw Elena. He saw her in Anya's defiant spirit. He remembered her belief that there was good in him. For 25 years, he had proven her wrong. He had become a creature of the night, a necessary monster who kept other monsters at bay. He had built an empire of fear. But what was the point of a kingdom if you couldn't protect one innocent girl and her foolish brother? What was the point of all his power if he let a jackal like Petrov run roughshod over the very people his rules were meant to keep safe? The internal debate was brief, but monumental. It was a war between the man he had become and the man he was supposed to be. The memory of Elena won. He made his choice. The logic of his world be damned. Julian looked up from the spoon and met Anya's gaze. His expression was unreadable, but the ice in his eyes had thawed, just a fraction. "Your brother will be home tonight," he said. The words were not a promise. They were a statement of fact. Anya stared at him, her mind unable to process it. "What? But? I can't pay you." "I have nothing," she fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a crumpled envelope. "I have $200. It's all I have in the world." He looked at the small, pathetic offering. He thought of the millions of dollars that flowed through his organization every week. He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Keep your money," he said. "You do not owe me anything." Her confusion deepened. "But why?" He didn't answer her question. Instead, he pulled out his phone. He did not look for a number. He had them all memorized. He dialed. The call was answered on the first ring. "Marco," Julian said, his voice dropping back into its familiar tone of cold command. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the night." A pause on the other end. "Boss? Everything all right?" "Everything is fine. I have a piece of trash that needs to be taken out." He made another call. This one to the head of his enforcement unit, a man known only as the surgeon for his precision. "Sergey. I have a target. Dmitry Petrov." He listened for a moment. "Yes, that one. He has something that belongs to me now. A boy. Named Mikhail Kovalenko. I want the boy back. Unharmed. Is that understood?" He listened again. "I want Petrov. Find where he is holding the boy. I want your team to secure the location. Isolate Petrov. Do not engage him. I will handle him myself. I want him waiting for me at the warehouse on Pier 4. You have 1 hour." He hung up without waiting for a reply. He knew his orders would be followed to the letter. He put his phone away and looked back at Anya, who had listened to the one-sided conversation with wide, terrified eyes. The speed, the chilling efficiency, it was like watching a force of nature being unleashed. He called Marco again. "Come back inside. Take the young lady to the safe house on Ash Street. Stay with her. Make sure she is comfortable. Wait for my call." A moment later, Marco appeared in the alcove. He looked at Julian, then at Anya, his face a storm of unanswered questions. But he said nothing. He was a loyal soldier. He simply nodded. "This way, miss." Anya stood up, her legs still unsteady. She looked at Julian, her heart pounding. She had come here to face a monster. She had slapped a king. And now, that king was going to war for her. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling impossibly small. Julian simply gave a slight nod. He watched as Marco escorted her out of the restaurant, a silent, powerful guardian at her side. He remained in the booth, alone once more. He picked up his glass of water and took a slow sip. The red mark on his cheek was fading. But he could still feel the phantom sting of it. It felt like being woken from a long, deep sleep. The plan was not a plan. It was a purge. Dmitry Petrov's operation was small-time, built on fear and sloppy intimidation. He was a weed that had grown in the cracks of the city's concrete underworld. Julian's organization was the gardener, and it was time to pull that weed out by the root. Sergei's team, the surgeons, were not thugs. They were 12 men, mostly ex-special forces, who moved with the silent, coordinated grace of a wolf pack. They did not use brute force unless necessary. Their weapons were information, speed, and surprise. Within 15 minutes of Julian's call, they had a location. Petrov was using a derelict auto body shop in the industrial district, a place reeking of rust, grease, and desperation. He had a handful of low-level enforcers, men who were more muscle than brain. The execution began. It was not a shootout. It was a whisper campaign of violence. 2 of Petrov's collectors were sitting in a car outside a tenement, waiting to lean on some other poor soul. Their car doors were opened simultaneously. Before they could even register the intrusion, they were subdued, disarmed, and bundled into an unmarked van. They vanished from the street without a sound. Another 2 were watching the front of the auto body shop. They thought they were the lookouts. They did not realize they were the ones being watched. A team of 2 of Sergei's men emerged from the shadows behind them. A quick, precise strike to the back of the neck. They crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The communications went dark. Petrov's men found their phones suddenly dead. No signal. A localized jammer had turned their cheap electronics into useless bricks. Panic began to set in. Inside the shop, Mikhail was huddled in a small, filthy office, guarded by a single, bored-looking brute. The boy was terrified, his face pale and tear-stained. He had seen the casual cruelty of these men. He knew his life was worth less than the money he owed. The lights in the shop flickered, then died. The entire building was plunged into darkness, save for the single grimy window in the office. The guard cursed and stood up, pulling out a flashlight. He opened the office door and peered into the cavernous, black space of the garage. "Hey! What's going on?" he yelled. The only answer was the sound of his own voice echoing back at him. A floorboard creaked behind him. He turned, but it was too late. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the office. There was a soft thud. The guard fell like a sack of cement, his flashlight rolling across the floor, its beam cutting a frantic, bouncing path before coming to rest on the wall. One of Sergei's men stepped over the body and knelt beside Mikhail. "Mikhail Kovalenko," he asked, his voice calm. The boy, trembling, could only nod. "You're safe now. We're here to take you home." Meanwhile, Dmitry Petrov was in the main garage, screaming into his dead phone. He was a man of medium height, with a bloated face and small, piggy eyes that darted around nervously. He wore a track suit that was too tight and a gold chain that was too thick. He projected an aura of cheap menace. He felt the shift in the atmosphere before he understood it. The silence. The sudden cold. He turned and found himself no longer alone. 4 of Julian's men stood blocking the main bay door, their forms silhouetted against the faint city glow from outside. They were perfectly still. Perfectly silent. Petrov's bravado crumbled, replaced by a raw, animal fear. He knew who they were. Everyone knew the look of Volkov's men. "What is this? What do you want?" he stammered, backing away. One of the men stepped forward. It was Sergei. His face was placid, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "Julian Volkov wants to see you," he said simply. Petrov was disarmed and escorted to a black sedan. The ride to the docks was silent. Petrov's mind raced. What had he done? Which line had he crossed? He collected from deadbeats. He ran his small patch. He tried to stay out of the major players' way. He couldn't think of any transgression that would warrant the personal attention of the ghost. The car stopped inside a vast, cold warehouse on Pier 4. The air smelled of salt and decay. A single, powerful light hung from the ceiling, illuminating a circle on the concrete floor. In the center of that circle stood a chair. Petrov was forced into the chair. His hands were tied behind him. Sergei and his men retreated into the shadows, leaving him alone in the spotlight. He waited. Every drip of water from the leaky roof sounded like a hammer blow. Every gust of wind rattling the corrugated metal walls sounded like a scream. Then, he heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. The sound of expensive leather shoes on dirty concrete. Julian Volkov emerged from the darkness and stepped into the light. He wore the same immaculate suit. His face was calm, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a professor about to deliver a lecture. He circled the chair slowly, his eyes never leaving Petrov. "Dmitri Petrov," Julian said, his voice a quiet, conversational tone that was more unnerving than any threat. "Do you know why you are here?" "No." "I swear, Mr. Volkov, I don't know." Petrov blurted out, sweat beading on his forehead. "I keep to myself. I pay my dues. I don't cause trouble for you." Julian stopped in front of him. "You are mistaken. You do cause trouble. You are trouble. You are a rat, chewing on the foundations of this city. My city." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We have rules, Dmitri. Rules of conduct. You know them. No chaos. No unnecessary cruelty. We are businessmen. You are a parasite who enjoys the suffering of others. It's just business." Petrov pleaded. "The boy, he owed me money. He has to learn." Julian's face hardened. "The boy?" "Mikhail Kovalenko. 17 years old. You terrorized his family. You took him from his home. You threatened his sister. For what? A few $1,000s. He has to pay his debt." "He will," Julian said coldly. "I will pay his debt. And now, you will pay yours." Julian straightened up. "You see, you made a mistake. A very personal one. You crossed a line you did not even know existed. You brought this upon yourself when you hurt that family." He paused, letting the words hang in the cold air. "The girl, his sister. Her name is Anya." Petrov looked confused. "I don't know any Anya." "You don't have to," Julian continued, his voice laced with a cold fury that was terrifying to behold. "She reminds me of someone. Someone from a long time ago. Someone from a life you could never comprehend. A life with honor. By threatening her, you did not just break a rule, Dmitri. You desecrated a memory. And that is a transgression I do not forgive." Julian looked past Petrov, into the darkness. "The boy is safe. His family is safe." He looked back down at the terrified man in the chair. "But you have become a liability. Your business is concluded. Permanently." He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to the shadows. Sergei and 2 of his men stepped back into the light. Dmitri Petrov began to beg, his words turning into incoherent sobs. But no one was listening. His chapter in the city story was over. It was being closed with the same silent, brutal efficiency with which it had been opened. Julian Volkov turned and walked back into the darkness without a backward glance. The matter was settled. The debt was paid. He would not be bothered by Dmitri Petrov ever again. The safe house on Ash Street was an unassuming brownstone, indistinguishable from the others on the quiet, tree-lined block. Inside, it was clean, comfortable, and secure. Anya had been pacing the living room for what felt like an eternity. Marco had offered her food, drink, but she couldn't stomach anything. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and a fragile, terrifying hope. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She trusted the quiet, powerful man she had slapped. But she also feared him. He moved in a world of shadows and violence she could not comprehend. Then, she heard a car pull up outside. Marco, who had been standing silently by the window, turned to her. "They're here." Anya's heart leaped into her throat. She rushed to the door just as it opened. And there he was. Mikhail. He looked pale, exhausted, and utterly terrified, but he was whole. He was alive. He saw her and his face crumpled. Anya! They collided in the doorway, clinging to each other, a mess of sobs and whispered assurances. Anya held her brother's head against her shoulder, stroking his hair, her own tears of relief flowing freely. He was safe. Her foolish, wonderful little brother was safe. Julian Volkov stood a few feet behind them on the stoop, watching the reunion from a respectful distance. He did not intrude on their moment. He simply observed, his face an impassive mask. But inside, something shifted. Something that had been frozen for a quarter of a century began to thaw. Watching them, he felt the ghost of a feeling he thought long dead, the simple, profound satisfaction of doing something unequivocally good. After a few moments, Anya composed herself enough to look up. She saw Julian standing there, a silent, formidable presence. She gently guided Mikhail inside, settling him onto the sofa. She turned back to Julian, her eyes shining with a gratitude so immense it left her speechless. "He is safe," Julian stated, his voice soft. "Petrov and his people will not be bothering you again. This will not happen again." Anya fumbled in her coat pocket, her hand closing around the crumpled envelope of cash. It felt so foolish, so insulting now, but it was all she had. It was her symbol of trying to make right. She pulled it out and held it out to him. "Please," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not enough, I know that. But it's all I have. You have to take something." Julian looked at the envelope in her hand, then at her earnest, tear-streaked face. He gently took her hand, but instead of taking the money, he closed her fingers back around it and pushed it softly back toward her. "You already paid me," he said. Anya stared at him, bewildered. "When? I don't understand." He raised his hand and lightly touched his own cheek, the spot where she had slapped him. A faint shadow of the mark was still there if you looked closely. "You paid me then," he said. "You reminded me of something I had forgotten. Something worth more than money." He saw the question still in her eyes and decided to give her a piece of the truth. "A small one. Your courage, it reminded me of someone I used to know. Someone very important to me." He paused, taking a small risk. "Your aunt, perhaps? You said your last name was Kovalenko." Anya's eyes widened slightly. "How did you?" She searched his face. "My mother has a sister, well, had. She passed away a few years ago. My Aunt Elena." Elena. The name hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He managed to keep his composure, but inside, his world tilted on its axis. It was her. It was truly her bloodline, her fire, living on in this fierce young woman. "Elena," he repeated, the name a ghost on his tongue. "She used to tell me stories about a man she loved when she was young," Anya said, her voice wistful. "A boy who was brave and fierce, who promised to protect her. But he disappeared. She never knew what happened to him. She waited for him her whole life." Julian felt the weight of 25 years settle on his shoulders. He was that boy. He had disappeared. He had become this man to fulfill that promise, but in doing so, he had lost the very person he meant to protect. And she had waited. The knowledge was both a comfort and a profound agony. He had his closure. A bitter, heartbreaking closure. Anya looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who had just saved her family, who spoke of her long-lost aunt with a strange familiarity. She saw the deep, ancient sadness in his eyes. "What are you?" she asked, the question whispered, raw and honest. "Are you a bad man?" Julian held her gaze. The question hung in the air, the most important one anyone had asked him in years. He thought of the things he had done. The violence. The fear he wielded like a weapon. He was no saint. He was a monster to many. He looked past her, at Mikhail, now wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, safe. He looked back at Anya's face, so full of Elena's spirit. "I am what I need to be," he answered, his voice quiet and heavy with unspoken history. "But tonight, Because of you. I got to be a good man. The moment stretched, thick with meaning. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple, stark white business card. He handed it to her. It was blank, except for a single phone number etched in black ink. "This is my personal number," he said. "If you, or your brother, or your mother ever need anything at all, you call this number. Day or night. They will find me. You have my protection. Always." Anya took the card as if it were a sacred relic. It was more than a number. It was a shield. A promise. It was safety in a world that had shown her none. "Thank you, Julian," she said, using his first name for the first time. He gave a slight, sad smile. He had done what he came to do. He turned and walked out the door, disappearing back into the night, leaving the warmth and the light of her world behind. 5 years passed. The city moved on. Seasons changed. Life, for most, continued its predictable rhythm. For Anya Kovalenko, life had been reborn. The terror of that night faded, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of security she had never known before. She finished her degree in business, graduating with honors. The frantic, desperate girl who had stormed into La Fiamma was gone. In her place was a confident, capable woman who met the world with a calm smile and an inner strength forged in fire. Mikhail had turned his life around completely. The brush with Petrov's world had scared him straight. He finished high school, went to trade school, and became a skilled carpenter. The foolish boy was gone, replaced by a thoughtful, hard-working young man who was fiercely protective of his sister and mother. 2 years after that fateful night, a small, charming bakery opened on a sunny corner in their neighborhood. It was called Elena's Hearth. It was Anya's dream. The aroma of fresh bread and pastries filled the street, a warm and welcoming scent. The financing for the bakery had appeared as if by magic, an anonymous grant from a city development fund for small businesses. Anya never questioned its source. She simply accepted the gift and poured her heart and soul into it, making it a beacon of warmth and community. The bakery thrived. It was a place of simple joys, of flour-dusted hands and happy customers. It was a world away from the shadows. Anya never used the number on the card. She kept it tucked away in a small wooden box, along with her aunt's few remaining letters. She didn't need to. The promise was enough. The knowledge that a guardian angel, albeit a dark and dangerous one, was watching over her family was a silent comfort that allowed her to build a life of peace. Far across the city, in a steel and glass tower that pierced the clouds, Julian Volkov sat behind a vast, empty mahogany desk. His office was a reflection of the man himself, minimalist, precise, and devoid of personal sentiment. There were no family photos, no clutter, no awards. It was the sterile command center of an empire. Almost. On a low credenza behind his desk, nestled between rows of leather-bound books on strategy and history, was a small, private collection. In the center stood the faded, creased photograph of a young, laughing Elena. It had been his only memento for 25 years. But now, it was not alone. Next to it sat a small, simple silver frame. Inside was a recent photograph. It showed a smiling young woman and a handsome young man, their arms around each other, standing proudly in front of a bakery sign that read Elena's Hearth. Anya had sent it to the restaurant, addressed to him, with a simple, unsigned note on the back, "Thank you." Julian looked at that photograph every day. He looked at Anya's face, so alive with her aunt's spirit, and at the peace in her brother's eyes. He saw the life he had saved, the future he had secured. It was a tangible result, a light in the endless grey of his existence. It did not absolve him of his sins. It did not wash the blood from his hands. But it was something. It was a testament to the fact that even a man like him could, on occasion, create something good. The photo was his proof. His quiet, personal redemption. He was still the ghost. He was still a man of violence and fear. His world was still one of ruthless order. But the slap had changed him. It had knocked the dust off a part of his soul he thought long dead. It had reconnected him to the boy he once was, the boy who had made a promise to a girl with laughing eyes. True strength, he had come to understand, was not just about the power to destroy. It was about the wisdom to protect. Courage was not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. Anya's desperate act had been the bravest thing he had ever witnessed. Sometimes, a life can pivot on a single, impossible moment. A single act of defiance can echo through the years, changing not just one future, but two. And sometimes, the harshest touch can be the one that reminds a man not of the monster he has become, but of the hero he once promised he would be.